esteemed colleagues, we are going to continue our working day. We are going to have the latest updates regarding the activities of OSCE SMM mission from Michael Bociurkiw. You have the floor, sir. Good afternoon, dear friends. First of all, I would like to express my gratitude to the Ukraine Crisis Media Center. I can see, most of the volunteers are working here and they're very hard, and we do appreciate their work and their hospitality and support.
Latest operational updates. This is very fresh information. So the OSCE Special Monitoring Mission is continuing to monitor, of course, the implementation of the package of measures for the implementation of the Minsk agreements. However, there are times when our monitoring continues to be restricted by third parties and, of course, security considerations such as shelling. Over the past 24 hours, actually, this is yesterday for the period ending up until yesterday evening. Fighting continued unabated in the area of Donetsk airport. The Special Monitoring Mission to Ukraine had observed yesterday several ceasefire violations, mainly around Avdiivka, Pisky, Spartak, and Zhubunki. Also yesterday, for the second consecutive day, fighting subsided in Shirokine area, but as we have been saying, the humanitarian situation continues to be quite dire. Also, as part of those Minsk agreements, the Special Monitoring Mission continues to monitor heavy weapons holding areas, and I can say that we have observed that not all heavy weapons previously recorded remain in situ or remain in place. Also, the Special Monitoring Mission continues to observe intense and protracted fighting in the area surrounding Donetsk airport. Yesterday, and indeed the day before, the number of explosions that our monitors heard, both incoming and outgoing, total in the hundreds. Yesterday, 500 plus, the day before, 700 plus, the days before in the area of 1,000, so this is quite intensive. And in our colleagues' assessment, the different types of weapons were being used, such as anti-aircraft machine gun, heavy machine gun, small arms, mortar, artillery, and even tank fire. Onto Shirokine, today, for the third day in a row, the Deputy Chief Monitor, Alexander Hug, has returned to Shirokine with a small team, and in fact, we brought some photos along to show you what was recorded and seen yesterday. Again, the Special Monitoring Mission team there observed a decrease, thankfully, in the intensity of the fighting in the area. However, as some of these pictures show, civilian lives are further threatened by deteriorating humanitarian conditions. There's a complete lack of drinking water and electricity, limited food, and no medical supplies. In fact, during our recent visits, residents there have told us that they've been forced to drink rainwater. So, as you know, we're not an implementing agency, but where we can, we do try to bring in some essential items such as drinking water. So yesterday, again, for the second day in a row, the monitoring team was able to access the village and move quite freely on foot. They walked through Shirokine and for the first time to its southern edge, where the only church in town is located, and I think we have a photo too of that church. The church observed that its windows have been shattered, and they saw small marks, presumably of shrapnel, on the walls of the church. So it goes to show you that even such a holy place is not immune from the effects of this conflict. The Deputy Chief Monitor and his team today, as in the past 2 days, continue to discuss a disengagement plan for both sides in Shirokine. And yesterday, I can tell you that before leaving the village, the Special Monitoring Mission intended to install a water cistern in the eastern edge of the village where several residents are still living. Also yesterday, the temporary calm or relative calm allowed a small family of displaced people to come back to Shirokane to check on their property. Now, the purpose of these visits, the purpose of the visit to Shirokane is to encourage the parties to further disengage in Shirokane, as well as to test access to the town, of course, to visit the civilians and to conduct a humanitarian assessment. The so-called DPR and, of course, Ukrainian armed forces should work towards normalization and demilitarization there. The OSCE is monitoring the ceasefire and facilitating monitoring, and wherever it can, verifying the withdrawal of heavy weapons. The chief monitor, Ambassador Apakan, and the deputy chief monitor have continued to voice their disappointment that the ceasefire has been breached numerous times in and around the town of Shirokane, including in the past days. Also, heavy weapons have been used there. This clearly shows that the obligations under the Minsk agreements still wait full implementation by both sides. What our monitors have also seen, and I know I've spoken many times about on the topic of unexploded ordnance, is that the town has suffered even more damage than when the deputy chief monitor in his town visited last week, and that the amount of unexploded ordnance in the town is now noticeably larger. Of course, civilians constantly face this threat in addition to active hostilities within the town itself. And unexploded ordnance poses a serious danger to those remaining in the town. Hence, major demining and repair activities must be conducted before any civilian life can again take place in Shirokane. And to illustrate the threat that unexploded ordnance poses, I think most of you know by now that in the past couple of days, a journalist was quite severely injured during the visit to Shirokane. He was in serious but stable condition. But again, it shows the threat of unexploded ordnance, things like booby traps, not only to journalists, not only to our monitors, but of course to the civilians living there and elsewhere, indeed elsewhere in the conflict zone. Now, of course, sadly, the shelling in Shirokane continued throughout the Easter holidays with little reprieve, and this reportedly led to more casualties. And, this shelling, this fighting that occurred over the Easter holidays was in disregard of the ceasefire and poses a serious and immediate danger to the civilian population. So we must reiterate what the chief monitor, Ambassador Apakan, has been saying all along, that there must be the sides must immediately comply with the ceasefire as they have agreed to in the Minsk provisions. Ongoing ceasefire violations not only put civilian lives at risk, but also prevents desperately needed humanitarian supplies from entering the town. We repeat the importance of all sides to allow the special monitoring mission unrestricted access to Shirokane and other hotspots. Now, just a brief update on elsewhere. In the past 24 hours or so, our special monitoring mission visited the town of Rovenke. This is 55 kilometers south of Luhansk. And there, as in many towns in or around the line of contact, the humanitarian situation is deteriorating. We were told of shortages of food and medicines, and that there are 162 internally displaced people living there who receive limited support. Our monitors were also able to access Novedar, which is 49 kilometers northwest of Luhansk, and there we were told by representatives of the Red Cross that the humanitarian situation is worrying. We were told that the situation has got so bad that local residents have started to sell their own personal items, such as their own clothing, to buy food, for instance. And there, as in elsewhere, as our monitors have seen, there is much less food available at the local market. Now, before ending, I just wanted to cite some recent findings from our partners, our friends at the United Nations. Their last report was on April 10th. And indeed, many of the things they have found reflects what we recently reported in our last thematic report. Things, for example, that there's a rapidly increasing food prices, decreased food consumption has impacted the lives of many in the eastern oblasts of Ukraine. Also, that access to social services such as pensions and salaries remain suspended in many conflict-affected areas. And then also access constraints related to bureaucratic procedures and different practices in the field continue to hinder response. Now, in terms of some updated numbers, according to the United Nations, and they're citing the Ministry of Social Policy, there are 1.2 million registered internally displaced people at the moment. Now, I underline that these are only registered numbers, and the number is probably much higher. Also, in addition to that, according to UNHCR, there are more than 777,000 people who have taken up residence outside Ukraine and neighboring countries. This includes about 636,000 who have gone to Russia and 80,000 plus who have gone to Belarus. Okay. Also, on the issue of internally displaced people, as we have been saying all along, because we do visit them often in places like Kyiv, in places like Dnipropetrovsk and Mariupol, and also, of course, we talk to many mayors and governors, is that the internally displaced people throughout Ukraine have very limited access to food support or basic humanitarian assistance. Also, what we're finding, and indeed the UN is finding as well, is that, we talk, for example, in the conflict zone to school teachers, and many of them are telling us and others that they haven't been paid salaries for many, many months. All right. And I think, and just a quick word on, this is quite important, I think, now that we're in the spring months. If you go to the countryside, you will see that people are getting busy on their fields, ready for the planting season. But unfortunately, there's increased insecurity due to the damaged agricultural infrastructure, coupled with the fact that in the conflict zone, people either they know about the presence of landmines in the field, or they're afraid to go tend to their fields because of the threat of unexploded ordnance. So that's why we often say that, in order for people to get to that comfort level, either to return to their original place of residence or to get to work in their fields, is that a lot of work is going to have to be done to clear areas of unexploded ordnance. It poses a very, very big threat, especially to children. Even in some of the footage that we saw that was collected from Shirokine last week, you can see these little bomblets on the ground all over. And we know that from previous conflicts that these little bomblets sometimes appear like as if they're toys to small children. They pick them up, and with very devastating consequences. So on that note, I will stop and be happy to entertain any questions.
Thank you very much, Michael. I would like right away to address you with my question. So recently there has been information, and it was later on stated by one of the Ukrainian MPs that OSCE passes information to the rebels, because once the OSCE leaves certain location, the shelling starts right away. Could you comment on that somehow? Sure.
Of course, I'm very familiar with this question. It's come up a few times over the past months, and indeed last night on the Hromadske TV interview. What I have to say in response to that is, not only is this an allegation that has continued to fly around, but I think the implication there, and indeed it's not a very welcome one, is that, the implication is that information is being passed to a third party. Now, I can tell you that each of the participating states of the OSCE, number one, has the right to nominate, to second monitors to our mission. Hence, we have now monitors from over 40 different countries. Before they join the mission, there's intensive review. There's also intensive training in Vienna, and also intensive training here in Kyiv. And a lot of that training has to do with ethics, with logistics, with how to treat information. Also, when monitors join the mission, they are well aware that they're members of the OSCE Special Monitoring Mission to Ukraine, that they're not representing their respective countries. I can also tell you that when our colleagues are out in the field, they typically work in very small, tight teams. And so, there's never really any doubt as to what everyone is doing. They work together very harmoniously in these small teams. And in terms of, these are disturbing allegations in the sense that the brave men and women of the Special Monitoring Mission, although many of them are former military, many of them have served in other conflicts, they take a huge risk. They take a huge risk when they're out there in the field. And I can tell you that there have been many times when our monitors have been out, whether it's at a checkpoint, whether it's talking to families, whether it's talking to officials, that shelling has happened very close by, and then they have to leave very quickly. So, we assume quite a big risk on that front. And, at the moment, again, the mission is involved in facilitating access for experts to resume their work at the crash site of MH17. The work there involves not only the continuation of the investigation, but it involves continuation of the recovery of human remains. And I will remind you that last July and August, when we were there was meant to be a temporary ceasefire. Someone broke that ceasefire. We don't know who, but they know who they are. And this is a very unfortunate thing when these types of things happen, because it disrupts the very, very important work that needs to go on. Finally, and I don't mean to belabor this answer that much, is that we imagine if, I remind everyone, imagine if the Special Monitoring Mission to Ukraine was not on the ground, was not in 10 cities throughout Ukraine. 350 of our monitors are in the conflict zone, working very hard. In fact, what we've done, partially in response to the requests from the Ukrainian side, is extended our monitoring hours, our daylight monitoring hours. I know many people would like us to work at night, but for security reasons, it's not possible to go on patrols. But nonetheless, many of our colleagues are busy at night, in the middle of the night, compiling reports, sharing that very important information. So we are the largest and pretty much the only international presence on the ground in the conflict zone, reporting very faithfully what is going on day in and day out.
Thank you very much. Запитання, прошу, і не забувайте представлятись.
Hello, I'm Daria Fedenko from Channel 5. Am I right in my understanding that after your visit to Shirokino, together with Russian and Ukrainian representatives, you made the conclusion that this area can be demilitarized? So what shape will it take? When shall it be? Everybody will withdraw the weaponry or what?
I wish I could tell you that would happen immediately, that would happen today. Of course, one of the most important components of the Minsk agreements is the withdrawal of heavy weaponry. The situation in Shirokino is similar to the situation in and around Donetsk airport, is that the two sides are very, very close together. And what typically happens is when one side fires, it provokes a response from the other side. I know that these discussions are going on, and I don't want to, again, speculate on what's going to happen, but I know that they're very intensive talks. Hopefully they won't take very long, but all sides will require that pullback of not only heavy weaponry, but in fact all the guns need to be silenced, And of course, as I've said many, many times, it will take a lot of goodwill and trust for a ceasefire to happen. We remind all sides that the reason we are pushing so hard for a ceasefire, for pullback of heavy weaponry, is that if this does not happen, it could lead even to more deaths and injuries on the civilian side. I can tell you, I'll also tell you that the latest figures, according to the UN, is that the number of people killed, documented people killed, is now 6,108 of last week, and well over 15,000 have been wounded. And these are actually conservative estimates. So it's clear why demilitarization, de-escalation, ceasefire needs to happen right away.
Дякую. Уточніть, будь ласка, ще такий момент. От на фотографії
Can you please clarify, at your photos, you show OSCE, Russian and Ukrainian representatives. Have you managed to meet the guys on the other hand, on the other side of Shirokino border?
That have been taking place the past couple of days. Indeed, last week there were representatives from the Ukrainian side and the Russian side of the Joint Center for Control and Cooperation, the so-called JCCC. So, and I know that there's ongoing talks with senior government officials. In fact, just recently, our chief monitor met with the foreign minister, and I'm told they were very fruitful and productive talks. So, on a number of different levels, on the field, on the ground, and at very high levels here as well. Also, our colleagues, of course, the chairmanship in office in Vienna and elsewhere, working very hard in the capitals to achieve a full, comprehensive, long-lasting ceasefire.
Дякую. Будь ласка, наступне запитання. Уточнення.
Next question or clarification, if there is none. Thank you very much, Michael, and we are looking forward to seeing you again in a week with the detailed information. We have next briefing in 10 minutes. Thank you.